A very warm welcome to Creative Bureaucracy Festival Meets Science. I'm Julia Stamm and I direct the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first edition of our digital conversation series, the Creative Bureaucracy Festival Meets Science, that we convene in the context of this year's Berlin Science Week. As many of you know, the Creative Bureaucracy Festival celebrates outstanding innovations in the public sector and the creative changemakers behind them from around the world. We also want to contribute to thriving interactions between our bureaucracies and other sectors in society. In order to co-create solutions and contribute to solving the small and big challenges of our time and of our future, it is vital that we foster exchange and collaboration across sectors. And the interaction between science and policymaking is vital in this respect. So how can scientific findings, scientific breakthroughs, and recommendations reach our administrations and our public offices in a way that actually makes a difference? And this is what we want to focus on now. Under the headline Creative Bureaucracy Festival Meets Science, we host a series of digital conversations with leading experts on specific topics to take a closer look at the relationship between public sector and science. And these conversations will be broadcast each day during the Berlin Science Week. And I'm absolutely thrilled to open these conversations with an exchange with Tommi Laitio. Tommi is, since January this year, the inaugural Bloomberg Public Innovation Fellow at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins University. 10 years ago, Tommi joined the city government of Helsinki as the Director of Youth Affairs, and in 2016, he was elected as the first Executive Director of Culture and Leisure. Under his leadership, the department has won international and national awards for innovation in youth employment, public libraries, citizen engagement, cultural access, COVID-19 response, and increasing physical activity. And before joining the city government, Tommi worked for the European Cultural Foundation in Amsterdam, the think tank Demos Helsinki, and as a journalist. That's quite a mouthful, Tommi. A very warm welcome. It's really wonderful to have you here. And we'll discuss a little bit about the different position that you have worked in, because it really reflects very nicely, the topic that we want to discuss today. But let us start by maybe talking a little bit about the notion creative bureaucracy. When you hear this, what comes to mind spontaneously?
Very nice to join this conversation today. And when I think of the idea of creative bureaucracy, like I've always loved the word bureaucracy. I know that everyone who works in government doesn't love it, but for me, the creative bureaucracy kind of sends this message that we have to do our work in government in a way that builds public trust, and we have to work in a increasingly complex environment, which means that we can't do all things in the same way as we've always done them. But I think that the word bureaucracy in it also sends the message that we have to recognize that we work in an institution. Government is not a startup, and that we need to institutionalize the good findings that we have. So we can't reinvent the wheel every single case in every single case and on every single day, but we also have to think about practices and kind of institutionalizing the way we work. That's how I approach creative bureaucracy.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting notion, really, that you say, okay, this brings us to understanding really that we work in an institutional context, and that it's actually really important to have this context in order to also develop the kind of framework and the policies that we need to implement.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to get across, because I think also, like, when we think about bureaucracy, it's also about not everything doesn't have to start from scratch. I think we also need to put value on things that work quite well, and upholding those practices and those traditions that actually work well in government. I think easily these words like creativity and innovation give this idea that everything that's of value is new. And I think in government, we also have to give quite a lot of value to things that are working well at the moment.
Yeah, I love that notion, because I fully agree. Innovation is not always about, developing something new and finding, something that wasn't there before, but it's really also about, how can we maybe come back to things that were working before, or maybe in another context, and, look at them from another angle. So I really love that notion that you brought in about, looking also at innovation differently. And I've spent a bit of time reading out your biography, Tommi, which is a very interesting one. And to me, you're really some sort of the embodiment of, what we also try to achieve with the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, namely, really bringing in this innovation to the public sector, and now basically bringing the public sector into research, if you see what I mean. This is what you're doing now with Bloomberg. But let's maybe look back at the position that you had before in the city government of Helsinki. So when you took over this role of the executive director of culture and leisure, you had to do quite a frightening job, if I may say so. So you had to merge 7 departments and do many different things, deliver 20 million resident experiences. You had a team of 1,800 professionals. I'm reading out the numbers here because they are so impressive, and a budget of $270 million US dollars. So how did you go about it? How did you do this?
Well, I mean, just to give a bit of context, the leadership of Helsinki had for a long time felt that the organization that had 31 separate departments often led to departments doing kind of the optimal job, but the results were not optimal. Things get falling between departments, and the political leadership felt that the organization should work more in a way that the election results and the kind of the political agenda has a more direct effect on the organization. So the city decided to go from 31 departments to 4 main units. And then I was elected to lead one of those. I came from a fairly small department. I was the director of youth affairs when I was elected to this role. And there were a lot of fears in these kind of mergers. And my department consisted of everything from a symphony orchestra to football fields, to cultural centers, to the city's public art collection, to youth clubs and libraries. And I think the main thing in the very beginning was to tell people that the goal is not to make us all the same. Mm-hmm. We did a mapping in the very beginning, asking the entire staff what motivates them in their work. Mm-hmm. And then a strong message across the old departments came that they are in their work because they care about equality. What drives them in their work is that they want to do their work so that the city seems like an abundant wealth of resources for people, and that people from all walks of life feel like it's easy to find things to do in the city. And we kind of decided to build the department on that notion. So not telling that the librarian needs to be similar to the orchestra musician, that building professional pride around sports, libraries, and youth work and arts and culture, and then building a very strong culture of collaboration that recognizes that we do a different job, and that we do meaningful things that are often unique. A concert today is different than a concert tomorrow. An engagement with a young person today is different than an engagement tomorrow. So strong professional identity close to the actual work that people do. A lot of talk about ethics. Mm-hmm. And then I started working with a fairly broad team of leadership. So we had a monthly meeting with like 30 key leaders to make sure that people feel like they're not left out, and making sure that we had quite a lot of critical conversations on where are we going as a department. And then we quite quickly noticed that the things where this kind of new organization can really bring value are things like safety, mm-hmm. occupational safety, procurement, mm-hmm. understanding user experience. So the idea wasn't that we from the top or from the central services come and tell how to run your branch library, mm-hmm. but it's more about how we can make those shared things work. Mm-hmm. And we were for the first time in a situation that we had specified lawyers working for this department, whereas before the small departments didn't have legal services, mm-hmm. many of them, because mm-hmm. they were so small. So really trying to think of what a new kind of superstructure can bring in as an additional value to the work.
Mm-hmm. I think you said a number of really interesting things. One that you didn't say, but that I sort of immediately thought of, was this idea of breaking down silos, which very often is tried to be done, but not very often in a very successful way, I would say, in organizations. You also said the goal was not to basically tell people that we are all the same, you have no right to exist, or what you do is very similar to what, the others are doing. But it's really, looking at what do you bring, what motivates you as a person, and really have this very strong notion of professional integrity, professional identity as well. And then building a culture of collaboration. I think this is really essential. And it's something that, resonates, I think, very strongly. And the last thing I wrote down for me is that you said the notion that, you also showed that there is the possibility to actually have more resources where they're actually needed. So it's not only merging and slimming down, but actually really empowering also and strengthening in a sense. So I really...
There was a sentence that I found myself repeating quite often during the first years, which are always tough in a merger like this, is that it's more important to do the right things than to do things always right.
I like that.
Which means that you have to really do ethical deliberation when you're working on it. And are we really doing valuable things? But we also have to take into account the resources and restrictions that come with working in a big organization. So creating this kind of culture in an organization that there's room for a critical conversation on whether we are doing the right things.
Yeah. A question that I need to ask, because we're talking about the relationship between public policy, administration, and science. When you sat down with the leadership and really thought about how to steer this process, how to make this a success, did you use scientific insights in one way or another?
Well, I'm very proud of the city of Helsinki that when we started this massive reform, which is the biggest public administration reform in the country in a decade, the city commissioned 3 different research projects. So commissioned one on how power works in an organization and how the use of power changes. So more from a public administration, political science point of view. Then there was one that was commissioned around it specifically on education and what's the impact on the educational services. And then one that was in my department and then in urban environment was an ethnographic research for management studies on what happens in an organization in a merger like this. So we had a researcher sitting in our leadership meetings for a year. So we had researchers sitting in hundreds and hundreds of meetings to the point that we forgot that they were there. And then every now and then they came up saying, we're going to publish our peer-reviewed papers much later, but these are some of the things that we are seeing. These are some of the things that we are hearing, how you talk to each other, how you talk about central government, how you talk about politicians. And it was a very good point of reflection. And I would recommend that to all cities. They were sometimes very tough for us as leadership to say that we were catched with trying to build our own territory by using language that was exclusionary to someone else. Or we discussed a lot how the noble goals of senior management play out on the level of service delivery. And kind of the contradiction that staff often has in trying to do good work and meeting the organization's goals. But I think that kind of honesty and truth is really needed. And we also built research collaborations into many of our other kind of transformation projects. I think you mentioned at the beginning the physical activity work. So we built a city level physical activity program that was led by the Cultural Leisure Department. And we had researchers in the city team building that project from the beginning. So every advertising we put out, every kind of project format that we put out was based on research. And I'm very happy to say that the city has been incorporating that approach to other projects after that as well. Like we really noticed that when we had public health researchers and social scientists, social psychology researchers in our team saying, if you communicate it like this, our research would say that this is how people would react. And I think more cities should be doing that, but we then need to invite the researchers to actually be members of our team versus consultants that we bring in every now and then to expect that they tell us what to do rather than bringing researchers really into our teams.
That's an interesting notion, to bring researchers in as members of the team and not so much as consultants, which is, I think normally the case. So maybe we can talk a little bit about this very positive example and what you think are main obstacles when it comes to really the relationship between science and the policy sector, and in particular when it comes to really including or bringing in and working with scientific findings in the administration.
I mean, there are multiple challenges. I think some of the biggest ones are really kind of bandwidth of people in senior leadership. That your focus is so much on like service delivery, and you work on a tight schedule, and you don't really have time to read research. I read more research during the 10 months here at Johns Hopkins than I read in 10 years in city leadership. And it's not because I don't care about research. I just didn't have the bandwidth for that. So I think we really need to think of ways to build that kind of those intermediary roles and those translation and dialogue opportunities for research and practice. The other one is time span. Usually in government, you need answers pretty fast. And you really need to get things moving. Whereas I think sometimes the focus of research is more on being exact and getting things right. Of course, there's different kinds of civil servants. There's different kind of researchers. But I think the how quickly you need to have something to deliver is somehow different often in especially in basic research and in government services. And I think one of the things that I've also seen is that we in government are not always the best in asking big enough questions from researchers. That we put researchers into this kind of consultation role. And we should really, and that goes back to my point about bringing researchers in early to the sense making and scoping part of our work, rather than just asking for an easy fix or solution. Really kind of bringing researchers into that conversation on what is the problem that we're actually having.
Yeah. So when I ask you about some of the things that you would recommend when it comes to really, working on these barriers, so there are two already, that really relate to how to deal with the researchers, to make them part of the team, to have them there from the very beginning, help them shape the problem and, the way to go about it. Anything else that you would say would need to be thought about? I
think I would really kind of highlight this role of these intermediaries. I notice now on this 2-year fellowship, when I talk to researchers, I can bring the world of practice to that conversation. And then when I talk to practitioners, I can say, I understand what you're going through. This research might be interesting to you. And I've been wondering if we need that sort of role actually inside our governments. As kind of a chief scientist sort of role. As in like, who should we be talking to about this? What do we know around this theme that we could build our programming based on? And then I think really maybe we should really put more focus also on bringing researchers into the implementation phase. Not only to the discovery phase, but actually bringing researchers into the implementation phase, because kind of implementing good scientific findings is it's an art of itself.
Yes.
One of the reasons that the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation has been set up is really to do this. That's why Bloomberg Philanthropy is a big American foundation, and Johns Hopkins University have started to collaborate to build this center that really that works concretely with cities around the world, but also works with world-class research and tries to build those convenings and projects where we can meet each other and kind of really create that room for new ideas and new openings.
Yeah, let's talk about this exactly. So the role that you're having right now, you're the inaugural fellow. So you're sort of shaping the path, leading the way. So to me, also from you, the way you describe it, the fellowship really sounds like a great way to bring policymakers closer to science and to really think about and work on this intersection. So what are your experiences after 10 months?
It's an it's an incredible honor to be invited to this role. There's two of us at the moment. So the idea is that at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, we always have one international public sector fellow, and then we have one domestic, as in US based. So I come from Helsinki. My colleague Terrence Smith comes from Mobile in Alabama, where he was the innovation director. So we have very different backgrounds in government, different roles, but also different political contexts, which I think it adds a lot of value, and we can actually learn from each other as well. The idea of the fellowship is that you reflect on your experience in government, you write and talk about it. So I've been talking a lot about Nordic solutions during the last couple of months, and then you run your own research project. So you take on that role of being a principal investigator in the project. And you have quite a lot of say on what your research is based on. So my research focuses on how cities build partnerships, and what are the skills and practices, kind of the bureaucratic structures and institutionalized practices that you need in government to do partnerships in a way that deliver great results, but also build people's trust in government. And that's not an easy combination always. And I look at that in the context of parks and public libraries. So I do case studies of cities in Latin America, United States, and Europe on really looking at this issue from the point of view of public servants and senior city staff, on like what are the competencies that we have to have in local governments to actually kind of reap the benefits of partnerships. Because there's quite a lot of research that these kind of public-private partnerships or partnerships with the residents can really generate much more public trust, can be a way to do things faster. We can find new innovative practices, but it doesn't happen automatically. So what are the roles that need to be in place inside governments? What are the practices that we need for partnership building? That's my research at the moment. So I'm working with 6 cities about to venture now into field work.
So that sounds fascinating. So what did it do to you, the fact that you're now basically on the side of researchers? Did it change your relationship to academia? And I would also be very interested in, what are your plans for afterwards? Do you think, from the experience that you're having right now, you would love to still engage with this research process a little more, or are you eager then to return to the field yourself?
I mean, it is a very different job than running services. They're both incredibly hard. And I think when I've talked to researchers, but also like the personal experience over the last 10 months, the more I dig into a subject, the more I realize how little I know about it. Which actually reminds you why research is so difficult and hard, because you become very aware of the limits of your knowledge. If you read one book on a subject, you feel like an expert. But if you read, like, I think I've read 170 peer-reviewed articles during the last 10 months. So I was like, oh, this issue is not that easy. It's not that simple. And therefore, like, being exact in the way you think, the way you write, and the way you speak, it's actually really, really hard work. And I have started to think, like, how could we bring those kind of scientific practices into government on how we solve problems? That's also one of the ways that I see a lot of links between kind of the scientific method and then the way we at the Bloomberg Center work with cities and teach them innovation methods. This idea that you should trust the process, can't jump from you need to focus on really making sure that you understand what your problem is. Like, you can't start your field work before you've done your literature review. These kind of things. And like, how, if we would more often in government also be able to explain in the way that you do in good research, as in, like, this is the way I got to the results. This is the way I got to the recommendation that I'm now making for decision makers. I think that would build more trust. And it would be a way also to deal with disagreements, saying there's these contradictory things that we cannot solve. We can't reach both of them. And therefore, in the recommendation I'm making, I'm suggesting that based on these arguments, we follow this route. And I think we need to bring that sort of discipline into both problem solving, but to the actual policy making and service delivery in government as well. So I don't have an answer on what happens after this. I find both of these worlds really fascinating. And I'm really also happy that you have a lot of universities that have these kind of in residence roles for practitioners. They're not a way to replace the tenured faculty at all, but it's bringing a different perspective into the organization.
Yeah. So when I think about what you said, so there is three things that I would like to basically take also as something that we want to work on at CBF, and maybe also together with you, who knows, Tommi. So namely the role and the importance of intermediaries. Then, the idea of how we can bring scientific practices into government and what this actually entails for both sides. And the last one would be the importance of trust. I think during our conversation, you mentioned trust at least 4 times in very different contexts. And I think it's really important to highlight this without delving too deep into this, because I think we're totally coming to an end. So before thanking you very much for being here, my last question would be, how can creative bureaucracy help overcome potential tensions between science and policies, between science and administrations? What is your take on this?
I think the putting really more focus on the method, as in that we in government also we would be good in saying, we don't have the right solution yet. So we're going to spend now a bit of months and use creative practices to really understand what we're dealing with. And I think that's an approach where the practice of cities can really learn from science, as in saying let's take time to actually make sure that we're trying to solve the right issue before we start thinking about solutions. And then, so more often approaching our work as a scientist and using that kind of the disciplined method of approaching a challenge or an issue is, I think, the future of creative bureaucracy.
Right. I'll take this away, a disciplined way to approach the issues that we have to deal with in bureaucracy.
And discipline doesn't mean boring.
No.
It doesn't mean uncreative. I think quite the contrary. I've seen now when we work with cities around the world, when you actually follow the route and you do the steps as planned and you don't jump over the difficult issues. And I mean, the solution space is fun. The challenge space is much more difficult and gets easily quite frustrating. But actually, when you actually do that well, you end up discovering a lot more layers in the problem that you're trying to solve than just looking at the data that might be on your table that the mayor wants you to fix.
Tommi, thank you very much. We could have gone on for, I think, another hour easily. Thanks for being my opening guest. It was wonderful. And, wish you all the best for the remainder of your fellowship. And I look very much forward to seeing you at the Creative Bureaucracy Festival in June next year. Thank you.
Likewise, this was my pleasure and honor. Thank you so much.